It is a beautiful day at IBM Hursley where the Mainframe Society group has gone on a roadshow, and we're going to be recording some special episodes of the Mainframe Community podcast. I'm joined here today by Louisa Seers and Anthony Papageorgiou. This is going to be a great episode, so look forward to continuing. So, obviously, we always ask the same question at the start. Let's just get straight stuck in. So, I guess, Louisa, you first. What does community mean to you?
So, for me, community is about a shared passion and interest in something. So a group of people that come together and that share the same interest. So for example, maybe everyone is a flautist and they like playing flute and they come together, and that for me is when you see groups together like that can celebrate.
And it's flautist, not flutist.
Flautist, yeah.
I've just found something out, folks. And I think actually that's a really interesting little point there, because what you just touched on is that you share kind of a passion, but you don't necessarily have to share the same perspectives, right? Because you're allowed to have different ideas on kind of how to innovate, because you still care deeply about, say, the platform or the people, the users, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you have to share the same perspective, but I think you have to share the same interest. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you meet someone for the first time at a community, you can ask the opening question. If we use the example of being a flautist, you can say, oh, well, what do you play? How long have you been playing for? You don't have the same questions when you meet someone at a bar or in the office for the first time. Yeah. You can ask very kind of open questions about your interests. So that for me is how communities are formed, because you all have you're kind of in the same perspective in terms of you're on a level playing field.
Yeah. You all enjoy playing the flute, right? That's
terrible.
And Anthony, what about you? Yeah, I think I'll take it a bit more sort of specifically to like our industry. I think for me, I've been working in mainframes for almost 18 years. I think I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for the community of people around that. Like, I had the benefit of working at IBM. Obviously, it's the home of the platform, but really, it's about learning. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about, initially it was just like, how much can I learn from these people about how, what the platform does and the context that we're in. Much more now, it's about trying to share the knowledge I've accumulated and, how to sort of bring up a new generation behind. So I think it's those interactions, but it's about sort of sharing of knowledge and the coaching, the teaching, the learning, and really helping. Like, we work in a very complex field. So being able to help everyone achieve like the overall goal, which is to produce these kind of amazing like systems that do things for for the general population, and we all contribute our little piece to that. But if we don't work together to do that, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. So it's sort of fundamental to actually getting value out of these systems, I think.
Yeah, camaraderie as well, really, isn't it? That, you are, it's like you say, you're pooling knowledge and you're potentially mentoring or being a mentee, and it's a very kind of dynamic relationship. Sometimes someone might know more about X and you know more about Y.
Yes. Yeah. So those are the best conversations, where you're just like, okay, I know this bit, this, but let's just like get a whiteboard and work out. Yeah. And
try to bridge that gap.
Yeah. You can't really do that, unless you have a community of people to pull on. Right?
That's it. Yeah. So I guess that leads on to the next question then, which is communities are obviously something we've kind of defined, but maybe are there any examples of community groups that you have, say, previously or currently member of? So would you like to go first, Anthony?
Yeah, sure. So I've a few things over the years. So sort of my first introduction to sort of communities was really through conferences. So obviously GSE, sort of in the UK and Nordics, and Share in the US was sort of a big one for me. But then a bit later on, we sort of started to do things around. We had an initiative that we started called Gen Z, which was all around bringing sort of interacting more with the people who are new to the platform, that are that sort of couldn't make it to those events, right? So we would say, well, we will come to the companies, and we'll sort of come out and say, well, let's talk to the people on the ground that you're trying to train up, that you're trying to engage, and do something for them. And I think in my current role now, it's much more working directly with customers on what do we need to do future design wise, what do we need to do with our products, what are the requirements. That's really getting into the importance there is just understanding fundamentally the job that people are trying to do, And, if we can understand that well, then we can hopefully build, products that work for the people who are trying to use them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously Gen Z is something that, kind of quite close to my heart in that sort of, I guess you could say it was the spiritual kind of predecessor to...
Yeah, I mean, we kind of started something, and I think, there's a few people maybe that listen to this that were involved in that. And we sort of had a great time, but I think we struggled with how to scale it at the time. And it sort of, we ended up, we passed it on to sort of a next generation behind us, and they've done some things that sort of evolved to like the mainframe and meetups, and then, seeing some of the stuff that's going on with I don't know, is it WAVEZ or WAVEZ?
WAVEZ.
WAVEZ, okay. So some of the stuff you're doing with WAVEZ is like, fantastic. It's like, yes, this was kind of what we, always wanted to be there, but just never was sort of, 10, 15 years ago. So.
Also touching on kind of community, I assume you spend quite a lot of time with sort of maybe our kind of colleagues across the pond in America, because you're saying Gen Z and WAVEZ rather than...
Yes, so the indoctrination from the company we work for, there's a certain pronunciation of a certain letter that comes up a lot in what we do.
Fair enough.
And yeah.
So, Louisa, what about yourself? With community groups, you touched on being a flautist, which is a word I'm going to use incessantly from now on. I will never let that go. Are there any other community groups? Do you play the flauts with other people? Do you have a community for that, or maybe you're solo? Or
yeah, so I love that you went deep dive into mainframe. I'm like, so there are two types for me. There's like the personal side of you have flute choirs, and I have. So up until COVID, actually, when everyone went online, I've been part of, I think, 3 or 4 flute choirs. So that's like 20 or 30 flautists that all sit. You can find them on YouTube. I think I'm actually on YouTube.
And you will be again with this episode.
And orchestras as well. So I'd say they're part of a big community, because you've got a group of people harmoniously working together that are doing vastly different things. The time signature is still the same, so the way the conductor works, but it's all, everyone's doing their own piece that works as a holistic piece of music. So personally, that's where I would say that I'm part of a community. In work, obviously, slightly different. So when I started IBM, apprentices as a cohort were a community, so we would all come together and have a shared experience of how we were joining IBM straight from school, the types of jobs we were doing. That was definitely a big community for me. And more recently, the Open Mainframe Project is a huge community, and it's very different to some of the kind of mainframe like conference groups that we do, because the Open Mainframe Project is all around how you can actually deliver code to a group of users. Things like Zoe, Galassa, CobolCheck. They have work groups that come together and make decisions around how they can design things differently. They have like open telemetry work groups. So it's a very neutral place across a vast number of companies that can come together, both end users, vendors, different students as well. There's a lot of university students part of the Open Mainframe Project. And that's a community in itself. So, joining scrums or monthly leadership meetings, all of that stuff is somewhere where you can just come and you can ask the stupid question, who are you and what do you do? And everyone's going to respond positively. And I think that whether that's personal or at work, I think it comes back to the same common theme, is sharing that passion, which is what you were talking about, right?
And that's a good point, isn't it? Is that you say like the stupid question that kind of everyone's willing to answer and they don't judge you for. In that case, really, is there any such thing as a stupid question? And I think that's the sense of a good community, isn't it? That you can ask those questions if you're comfortable, and people don't see it as a stupid question; they see it as a valid question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came into mainframe about 3 years ago, and coming to GSC for the first time, the UK conference in Whittlebury Hall, that was my first experience of being able to walk up to anyone. And I make the joke quite a lot that I can walk up to someone and say, make a joke about Rack F, and everyone will understand, at least to a certain level, what I'm talking about. And I think that's a huge part of the mainframe space, is that there's a lot of commonality in terms of the platform, that you can kind of talk to anyone and you share a common language that maybe someone that has never worked on mainframe wouldn't necessarily share that. So it's a nice it's a nice group of people from that perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a really good point that you brought up there with GuideShare and also the Open Mainframe Project, in that, these are organizations that do a lot for students. They try to bridge these kind of generational gaps, these maybe cultural gaps. Like you touched on, the student user group for Open Mainframe Project. I've supported that, and Devonte, Taylor, May. There's some amazing people who are involved in that, and I think it's really it's a noble goal that they're working towards, to try and sort of make this community bigger and more inclusive. I love that. So I guess that maybe leads to my next question, which is, of all these kind of community groups that we touched upon, so sort of Gen Z and the flute choir, etc. Flute choir, not flautist, because they're obviously a separate thing. What would you say are the kind of biggest similarities or differences between them? Maybe things that you kind of prefer about one, maybe you think another thing could pick up and learn from another. Shall I lose you're sort of racking your head there. Shall I let Tony go first?
Yes.
Tony?
Yeah,
I'm not right.
I'll go to, okay, I'll try and so I think the big differences you get are, at least for me, so if you look at something like the conference communities versus, say, like the user groups, or some of the more like the student communities or the open source communities, right? You have, I think the conference communities tend to be made of it's the people who are sort of lucky enough to travel, right, and attend these events, and they tend to be the sort of the leaders in their organization. They're sort of like, oh well, I need to come and learn about everything that's going on, and versus some of the more local meetups, the user groups and things we do, which tend to be made up of people who are much more in the nuts and bolts of sort of doing things on the ground. And I think that's, for me, is one of the sort of biggest difference between the two kinds of groups I interact with. Sometimes you have to be talking at a very sort of strategic, level about, kind of where we're going and, what are the challenges facing companies in the next 5 years. And then like the next time you're like, okay, I'm just trying to talk to you about, how do you do Kafka integration on the mainframe, and like what's the nuts and bolts of setting that up, or I'm sort of like throwing tennis balls around, just demonstrating like the importance of integration in like a banking transaction or something on a student track. So I think that variation, sort of the different kinds of audiences, the different kinds of people, where they're coming from, what they're what they're trying to get out the community, and being able to sort of talk to people on their on their terms, on their level, I think it's quite important. Just understanding those differences. I think it's one of.
And it's not just about necessarily the type of audience, is it? Because you touched on audience there, but it's also sometimes the scale. The size difference between.
Yeah, like you go to something, you go to an event, and it's got like 10,000 people.
Yeah,
that's a very different thing to sort of, we go to this event and it kind of has less than 100 people, and they're the same people every year, and it's almost like a family, and everyone knows like, oh, if you got an issue with this, well, just go talk to that guy, or go talk to her, because it's she knows everything about that area. And yeah, so sort of, again, very different vibes. And some of those sort of smaller ones, it's sort of interesting. You like the new person in the family first time you turn up, and it's that whole like trying to introduce yourself and sort of going around. So having like a friend who can like show you around and introduce you is sort of something very useful in those circles.
And I think that's actually also a really important point, because the more sort of I guess the kind of more eclectic mix of people, sometimes it can be quite intimidating to kind of network with them. And you look at, you GuideShare might have 700 people. You look at like the WAVEZ event, we had 100, but then you look at if you go to a university and you talk to the students, it might be like 30-40 people.
Yeah.
And also, because they're all from the same sort of university, the same kind of organization, it's easy for them to feel confident around each other. And I think sometimes that is something that maybe as I say, Open Mainframe Project and GS, these organizations are doing better at trying to kind of bring people out of their comfort zone, but also not kind of force them to be too uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's a great point there about like when you're in your tribe, you're really comfortable. Like, I will just ask questions. I'm sort of somewhat confident in my topic and the way people are going to react to things. Like, I've gone to things, so particularly because I work in the integration space, I'll go to conferences that are just focused more around integration rather than mainframe as a platform. And that's really interesting, because you'll turn up and there's like loads of banks and insurance companies. They're all talking about what they're doing around how their integration with mobile apps and like this business to business, B2B. And you sort of go, oh, cool. Well, how does that work when it goes to like your back end mainframe? And I won't name any companies, but the companies that obviously have one, right? And we know they have one. And they go, oh, yeah, I don't think we have one of those. And I'm like, you do, but it's sort of, you have to learn to speak their language. And, but you feel like there's sort of a little bit of an outsider, and that sort of cross pollination, I think, is quite important to make sure that we kind of, particularly for integration, because in these companies you find that you've got that cross-cut so many different tribes, and trying to sort of permeate the knowledge and the understanding of what the other side is dealing with. It's quite an important thing. So if you're brave enough to step outside your community and go to someone else's and say, hey, there's some people over here who see things in a different perspective, or maybe have some things that can add value to your world. It's always quite a good thing to do.
You don't refer to it as the mainframe. You say to that big monolithic black box in the background that does all the processing.
Yeah,
they go, oh, that one.
Your core banking system. I'm sure. Yeah, we still have that.
And Louisa, what about you? What sort of similarities and differences would you say? I'm sure there's going to be many similarities between a flute choir and Open Mainframe Project.
Yeah, I was going with an orchestra actually, but I could talk about a flute choir. I suppose the similarities are things like teamwork, working towards a goal, especially, and this is more specifically talking about running open source projects rather than conferences and kind of user groups. Because the goal of an open source project is often new releases. You'll have maybe documentation that's being put out to the world. You'll have a blog. You might have a new feature or function. So, for instance, in Galassa, we're looking at putting out a web UI at the moment. That's something that we're recruiting as a mentor for a mentorship. And so take that as an example. In order to make a web UI in Galassa, you would need maybe a designer, someone to look at the visual design. You might need someone as an architect to look at how the web UI would work with the current core framework. You might need a build engineer so that they can look at the continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. You'll need a developer who can look at Java. You might need someone to pull that group together, so some kind of leader. I'm trying to think of all the different varieties. So take that as like the 5 or 6 roles that you may need to move that forward. And you may need some kind of other interns or other people underneath that can help support the team.
Yeah.
Take that example where they're all running towards the same goal. There may be a roadmap as well that they're kind of working towards and issues that they're dealing with. Take an orchestra, right? So you would have a symphony that they'd be playing, but you might also in a concert. So in a classical concert, you often have 3 or 4 pieces that are being played. Now, there are a core set of musicians that will play the whole concert, but there are people that come in and out. So a tuba may not be needed for the whole concert. So, for example, a documentation writer may not be needed for the whole purpose of the release. You'll kind of drop in and out depending on when you're needed. But the core element is the teamwork. So as a orchestra, you know that the violins will come in on bar 4. You know that the cellos will probably do a crescendo around bar 10, maybe in the second section. You kind of know when you're starting an orchestra exactly how each of the bits work together because you're part of making that sound possible. Whereas when you're in an open source project and you're working with people that aren't in your organization and are volunteers, you're really having to keep that group quite tight so that you can kind of anticipate the documentation needs to be written at this point, the designer needs to be poured in at this meeting. All of those different factions together make the project work. So I think there's a lot of similarities. There's obviously a lot of differences. There's different skill sets. There's a lot of different... So one of the things that we talk about a lot and that you guys have just discussed was around how obviously the generations talk to each other. I think when you're in an orchestra or a flute choir, you're obviously at some level of competence so that you can play the piece, right? So there's an element of differentiation.
And I think the way you play the instruments doesn't change so rapidly as our industry. You don't get sort of the new flautists coming through and going, it's all changed. It's completely different to how it used to be.
No. But the element of mentorship is very similar. If, for example, with the web UI development, if you've got an architect in Galassa, that architect might want to talk to someone that's working on Kubernetes or Jenkins or Kafka or another open source project just to understand, is there another way I can look at this? Is there something I'm missing? That's in that kind of mentorship is very similar in the music world. You'll have people maybe a couple of desks up from you that you're looking up to that you might want to replicate. I think there are some very similar attributes in that sense as well. But it all comes back to the core principles of the community that we talked about a couple of minutes ago.
So what you're saying is that your project manager is your conductor, and all the other roles are basically the different sort of I guess departments, or I don't know, sort of divisions.
The conductor can't make music on his own.
There we go. Project managers eat your heart out. So
well, we're product managers, so I suppose we're in very similar roles.
There's that self-burn there.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point. Like, I'd actually never thought of it that way. And obviously, you're talking about, crescendos in bar 4, which obviously our watchers will know fluently. But no, I feel like I've learned a lot, honestly. Like, I never thought I'd go into this session today thinking, I want to learn about being.
This is when I say, well, I bought my flute here.
Oh,
but then we're going to go out solo. Yeah.
So I guess that would lead on to kind of the next set of questions then. So, Louisa, what initially drew you to spending your time with the Open Mainframe Project? You sort of talked about the kind of work that you do and, comparing it to sort of, an orchestra or choir. But actually, like, what drew you to that initially? What drew you to this specific community group and maybe open source technology on the whole?
Okay, so my role before coming into Mainframe was all centered around the consumption of open source. So how does IBM look at open source from so we're going to put some kind of package into MQ or into WebSphere or into, there's many facets of IBM, but it was all around the licensing and the legal work, and so it was quite technical from that perspective. And then when I came into Mainframe, there's the kind of Glassr was around as an internal project, but actually moving it into the Open Mainframe Project was a goal from the perspective of trying to get test to C users in a way that is easy, consumable, expandable, so it's not just on its own. So for me, there was a real need to move it into the Linux Foundation. So it kind of came as there was a need in my team, and I was the right person to try and drive that through into the Linux Foundation. But I think on the other hand, I'd come into the team, into our product management team, and I didn't really know much about Mainframe because I was from a different part of the business. And the Open Mainframe Project gave me a platform to go and meet lots of different people and learn about what mainframes meant to them. I didn't really understand that using VS Code was not a thing on the mainframe. I just didn't know that. So for me, it was a way to open up my knowledge and share that with some of the people, especially in the Kicks department, that trying to bring that together. So yeah, it's not something that I necessarily sought out as I would like to go and contribute to an open source project. It was there's a mission that needs to be done. How do we go and execute on that? And I seemed to be the right person at the time that could go and drive that.
Right, after time.
Yeah, and I love it now that I've been part of it for over 2 years. I've met a lot of the people for GS UK and Share, and a huge amount of community from the Open Mainframe Project, just in terms of the people that I've met. So yeah.
So I guess, are there any particular people you maybe want to give a shout out to in this episode? Like, I know Donna Huddy's done loads to support Open Mainframe Project. I worked with her quite recently for a video where they were getting kind of perspectives about the Z17 announcement, the launch, and that was a great opportunity to work with her, but also for her to kind of meet more the kind of young generation. Obviously, the people like myself and Tony are very passionate about. So
I think for me, it's just more a shout out to the people that contribute in their spare time to these open source projects, because it's not something, when Tony and I have discussed it here in the office, we always talk about the fact that it's very difficult to know where to start with getting involved in open source. It can be quite scary. The website's got lots of Slack channels and people, and you're like, oh, I don't know who any of these people are, how do I join? And so for me, I think it's more a shout out to those people. I can name lots of people that work on open source, but it's not necessarily about the individuals. It's about the fact that people spend their time outside of work doing that, and sometimes they get paid for it, but most times they don't. So maybe it's a cop out, and I love Donna very much, so always wanted to give her a shout out.
Well, I know it's it's a very kind of big community. There's loads of people who are kind of more involved than I realised at first. Henry Kuiper's got his kind of MF Pandas, and then Emma's got a project that is yet to be announced, which I can say because we're going live after Mighty Mainframe. Is called Blackwall, and it's basically like a kind of rack FZ secure kind of interface, and it's fantastic. And people are very passionate about these things, and Emma's work kind of reflects her enthusiasm, and that's to me is what kind of open source is all about. Is that you're not gatekeeping this kind of these opportunities, this technologies. You're saying this is something I care about, and I think you should too. And actually, here's me giving an opportunity for you to contribute and to kind of reap the rewards.
I agree. And actually something that we talked about briefly before the record was the fact that we consume, as part of the integration space, a lot of open standards, things like open APIs.
Yeah, and Kafka. And open liberty as well is sort of fundamental to a lot of our...
Yeah, and it's great the fact that you can walk in, it's back to the community sense again, you can walk into a room with people that know nothing about the mainframe and actually talk to them about open APIs because that's a common language between the two of us. And so things like that are really important, I think, across the IT network, really, because it's about opening the mainframe to show them that there are other ways to connect in and out using common language.
My catchphrase of it's just the same as anywhere else. You can connect to this box just the same way. But yeah, we speak the same language, and I mean it's quite an interesting point, right? Because you kind of got like the Glasser project is sort of something that was born out of Hursley and the team here in Kix, and they want to take that to the community. I think there are other things that are much more established, like Open API and Kafka and Liberty, but that were kind of there, and we said, well, that's great, let's use that to build some value for the platform. But obviously by doing that, you end up having developers and people in the team contributing back. You start to contribute to the sharing of knowledge around those technologies, writing blogs, doing webinars, those kind of things, attending, they obviously have their own conferences and communities around those projects. So it's sort of through that usage, you then sort of suck people into a community of around a particular technology. But yeah, that's sort of definitely a big part of what we do. Although you often don't think of it like that. It's kind of weird. You're like, oh, we just consume this framework, and you're like, well, actually, there's these communities that fundamental to what we do. The fact that they exist, and clearly part of them. But you sometimes just think, well, that's just part of the job, right? That's just what we do.
I think as well, it's also sort of like sometimes we have this sense of community, and maybe there's almost sometimes like the kind of prefix that we're maybe kind of not saying out loud.
Yeah.
So you could say open source is almost a technological community, very focused on the technology. Whereas maybe for example, you, Tony, you one of the people who started Gen Z or Gen Z, and that obviously later inspired the kind of WAVEZ initiatives that we're working on. And you could almost say that's more of a cultural kind of community, because it's more about the kind of supporting of aspiring mainframers rather than the sort of specifically about the technology. Because they may work on RackF, or they may work on open source, and they work on any number of other things, app development.
Yeah.
So I guess that would maybe lead me to asking you a similar question to Louisa. But what drew you into that kind of cultural community with Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite. I mean, you just sparked something in my head. I almost wanted to go back to it, but that point about differences between communities, the goals are different, right?
Yeah.
And as you said, like open source is usually about building a piece of technology, or consuming a piece of technology. Some of these other things we do are much more cultural. They're about building people up, or creating sort of platforms for sort of eminence and those kind of things. But yeah, I think Gen Z was an interesting one. I think at the time, like, we were always familiar with like sort of, oh, there's a skills problem around the platform, right? And that sort of, in some sense, has been more true or less true over time, and it goes through ebbs and flows. But I think at that particular point in time, we found ourselves talking quite a lot in our customer communities with leaders who were sort of very concerned about, well, we hire people in, and yes, there's sort of all this stuff happening at university, but we struggle to keep them, right? So by the time they are sort of quote unquote like productive, we've invested all into all this training, and then they'll go and work for someone else. What do we do? We said, well, that's actually maybe that's natural, right? That's good. They've had an experience with you. Maybe you take someone who's had an experience somewhere else, and the job market kind of does what it does. But one of the points that we're trying to make is, it takes so long to train people up and make them feel like they're useful and valuable, and they're just not really excited about the platform. And we sort of break that down, and we said, well, actually teaching someone the fundamentals of the platform, like teaching them how to program in COBOL or how to operate ISPF, or like that's, I mean, it can be challenging, but it's not like that hard. You can, if you put your mind to it, you can do like a mini course. You can learn those things. What's difficult is learning the complexity of your particular company's infrastructure, or like the millions of lines of code that make up your applications and the way that your business operates. And that's the stuff that's actually very difficult. And that's true of any platform. Right? I've had similar conversations with people in sort of communities around distributed, and they'll talk about, our legacy Java, we got millions of lines of code and no one understands it. It's the same problem. But yeah, really the motivation was, it was like, well, we can't get to the people who are new to the platform, right? They're not the ones that are turning up to customer briefings or conferences. So how do we get to those people? How do we enthuse them about what the platform's about, what it does for the world, right? And the reason we sort of saw that as quite important is obviously there's vitality and culture around the platform, but also, at the time we were, I was development lead for ZOS Connect. We're trying to take a new product to market around API integration, which was something that we felt was going to resonate more with the people who are new to the platform. They'd more instinctively get the value of that and to know how to pick that up and where to apply it. So we're like, well, okay, it's sort of two things here. Like, we need to enthuse those people to engage with the platform, and then through engaging with the platform, maybe this is an area they can pick up and feel responsible for it. So it's a little bit sort of motivated by what we're trying to do. But yeah, so we sort of thought, well, let's go out. Let's say, well, we'll bring it to you. So there's no travel involved. It's just a time commitment, and we'll actually talk to those people. And I think it was really for the first time, because they sort of get brought in and they say, well, your job is to like maintain these macros or something. And I don't know what. Yeah. Whereas we'll go in and say, and we were sort of as much sort of doing this, but we were also coaching their leaders, saying, well, this is the kind of stuff you can do in future, so you can sort of self-serve this a bit. But sort of really building a conversation around the importance of the platform to the world, and sort of showing people that really, this is quite fundamental to human civilization, right? It's sort of the digital backbone to the planet. Really. Yeah. If it went away, you would know about it. It's not not to throw shade on like social networks and like Netflix, but like if they went away, it would be it'd be very sad and people would get bored. But like,
yeah, you'd cry.
Life would move on.
Yeah, you can cry and you'd move on. Whereas you can't live
if you lose the information about sort of the fundamentals of like how much money you have and what you own and which country you're a citizen in, and like information about travel and bookings and like, all of this stuff is just fundamental, right? If you lose that, you go back to the dark ages. And I think it's once you show people the importance of that and you try and make it real, and I've been trying to do that more and more effectively for like the last 10 years or so. But once you make that real for people, they tend to then see, oh, actually this is quite exciting. Yeah. You put context around their work and you sort of see how many tens and like hundreds of millions of people they are affecting by the fact that they build, that they are responsible for a system that is so fundamental to everyone's livelihood. Then it sort of transforms that perception of the way they start thinking about it differently as well. They start bringing their ideas to it and say, okay, well, we've got this goal, but maybe there's I've got a new way of thinking, and why don't we do this? And you were talking about no dumb questions, right? My favorite kind of question is from people is sort of like, well, I see you do this because it's the way it's always been done, but why wouldn't you do this? Yeah. Right? And maybe sometimes there's a reason. We go, well, actually there's a reason why you wouldn't, because this. But most of the time you go, yeah, well, let's try that out. Why wouldn't we do things a bit more dynamically in the system? Why wouldn't we look at the time, why wouldn't we look at adopting new technology like APIs and now Kafka? So yeah, like doing those things, I think it's important to sort of move us forward, because there's lots of, the platform needs to continue to have people around it, and it needs to continue to remain relevant to the planet. So yeah.
I think that actually is a really good point, because at the end of the day, you've got this sort of youthful, almost not in a nasty way, but youthful ignorance. Like, they might not know why something is done a certain way, but actually that allows them to raise a point which can challenge the complacency of an organization. We've always done it this way, but we've never considered why. And actually, have we considered maybe what could be better, what could be more innovative?
Yeah, and maybe there were reasons for it like 10 years ago, and those reasons have changed, and actually you didn't realize
limitations that
you never go back and question the decisions you made. So
exactly.
Yeah,
no, I think that's
having that challenge is really important.
I think these are all fantastic points, and I think it's, as I say, the work that you've done with the kind of the up and coming mainframers is something that's still ongoing today, and I think it will continue, because it's this sort of generational handover, almost like the passing of the baton, the passing of the relay, and I think that's just fantastic, and I applaud you personally for that, and obviously I'm really proud that I'm involved in that now, and I can't wait to see who takes over from myself. And obviously the open source community is just fantastic, and as I say, it's inspiring for me to be able to see what everyone's involved in, and actually knowing that there's people who potentially spend this sort of time unpaid, and they just really care about just improving kind of software and opportunities. I think these are all really valid points. I think it's worth kind of rounding this up then, and asking really, what kind of main thing, maybe one main thing, would you like to see more of from the kind of the wider mainframe community going forward? Louisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think curiosity is my number one. Being open to change, being open to new ideas, but still holding the information that you've learned over, because it's the experience that people have is so extensive. That I think it's drawing on that experience and being able to question that it's okay to do things a bit differently, and it's okay that we keep the traditions and the things that we want to keep, the applications, all of that stuff is really valid. I think it's just, how do we be curious about the future? How do we be curious about keeping this platform sustainable over the long term? I think that for me it's not about forcing anyone to do anything, or being so enthusiastic about the new stuff that we forget about why the applications were the way they do, why the data is so valuable. I think it's just being curious enough to open your mind to asking those questions.
I love that. That's amazing. Yeah, curiosity. People will say, "Oh, curiosity got the cat," but actually, curiosity is what has pushed civilization forward through untold sort of problems to the modern solutions that we have. So I think that's brilliant. And Tony, would you have anything as poignant?
Yeah. So I think for me is two things. So first of all, be brave enough to sort of go to other communities in the IT space and talk to them about what this platform's about and how it might offer value in their space. I think that's quite an important thing. We start to bridge some of those gaps a bit more effectively, and equally try to bring people back, or being very welcoming of people from outside who might have a different perspective on things, and say, well, we do things in a completely different way. Why wouldn't you just do it like this? Welcome them in, bring some of those new ideas, because I think at the end of the day, it's all just computers and it's all just IT. And I think we are getting across the industry to a bit of a renaissance in the way we do things. Like, there's less churn now around, we used to have so much churn about, which source code management you're going to use, and, which kind of development practices. And I think that some of that's settling, and we're kind of, getting a bit more like, sort of, okay, here's the way that we're likely to approach IT for, quite a long time. These are the foundational principles, and that's really, the same across everyone. And then we just build value from there. So, I think cross those bridges and reach out to other groups.
It's amazing. Honestly, this has been an absolute pleasure, being here today at IBM Hursley, obviously interviewing you both and having you both support the mainframe community, not just in the kind of the literal sense, but in the kind of, the mainframe society sense. Yeah. I think we're really lucky to have you both here today. And I think, your insights are just invaluable, and I'm sure our audience will learn so much from that. So thank you both for your time, and thanks to our viewers for listening to the mainframe community by Mainframe Society. Thank you.